ground is getting.
Uncertainty. You know, it's really an anxiety-inducing thing. Who wants it, you know? I mean, come on, let's face it. We were wired to be in control of our environment. The whole evolution of self-consciousness is gaining control of our environment. Yet, uncertainty is real. And in the end and in the beginning. And we all need it. And that's what I want to talk about today. Because we've turned uncertainty into kind of a boogeyman. You know, it's what we try to keep away. But let's put it in the context of our metaphysics. Remember the three orders of creation: being, life, self-consciousness. These three orders are ruled by three essential processes. Now think of uncertainty when I name off these essential processes again: differentiation, semi-permeability, and complementariness. You see, there's a piece in each of those that's an opening, it's an uncertain place. And from it comes all of creation. So how is it we've made uncertainty the boogeyman? I mean, life has changed, right? It's built on a foundation of uncertainty. I read a great article from Forbes that said, those willing to embrace uncertainty and take decisive action, risky action, despite the many unknowns, they are the ones who will reap the greatest rewards. And I know in my own life, there were 2 points of extreme uncertainty that gave me the greatest rewards. One was marriage. Anybody who thinks they're going into a marriage and it's certain, play the Three Stooges theme song in your background. And the other one is having kids. I mean, who would have thought? Talk about uncertain, unknown variables, unbelievable, and yet great rewards. You see, those who can embrace uncertainty end up being more resilient, less depressed, less anxious, more positive. And if we really look at the advantages, I found 7 advantages of uncertainty. There were a lot more, but these stuck out. 1, uncertainty, facing it and owning it, develops character. It sifts priorities. Think about that. It sifts priorities. It provides rich context for gratitude. It disrupts our assumptions. It presents opportunity for humility. It provides a reality check, and it creates an intense focus on the next step. I mean, think about that. Uncertainty. And I want us to talk about befriending uncertainty. Not just living with it, but befriending it. At Stanford, they say one of the first things you can do to make uncertainty your friend is to reframe uncertainty as normal. You see, we see it as an anomaly. This, we're certain. We live our lives, red lights, we stop, green lights, we go to our job, we get our paycheck. Certain things are there in the pattern of our life, and they seem to be certain. And yet, once in a while, something comes in and we see it as, oh my God, that's uncertain. But if we begin to reframe uncertainty as normal, something happens, even in these extremely uncertain times. Spirituality. This is right where spirituality is, because when we talk about uncertainty, it's really about being here now. There's a lot of letting go, and a lot less holding on. Impermanence becomes a comfort, not a death piece. And of course, there's the human paradox. Even as I talk, I feel like as I'm talking, I'm trying to get uncertainty under control in order to feel more comfortable with it. And once again, I kiss my own ass in that happening, because that's the whole nature of uncertainty. It can't be controlled. It can be faced. It can be managed. And before I turn it over to Bob, there's only one game in town. There's only one game in life. And it's all bundled up in growing, learning, loving, dancing at the point of change which is now, and learning to live fully in that place. Now, today, Mary Ann is out. We hope she's doing okay. And Bob is with me. So, Bob, I just threw out a bunch of uncertainty, and I'm trying to control it, I guess. What say you?
Well, you started off by saying we're designed for certainty, and I'm not sure I agree completely with that. I understand where you're coming from, and we want to feel that we understand the patterns around us. Certainly, we in our hunter-gatherer.
Well, and I was suggesting that we are built to control our environment.
Right. And I think that, one of the things, let me start with the nervous system. It's kind of built on uncertainty because everything happens at the edge. We're designed to perceive edges, corners, the difference between lightness and darkness, and so forth. And where uncertainty comes into our lives, I think that we can deal with it by having certain things that a basis of certainty that we operate from. And one of those things, we talk about science all the time. One of the baselines of science is that there's the belief that there is a way to explain things in the universe. We may not know those explanations yet, but there are explainable situations that we can use to then explore the edges of uncertainty. And much like when we talked about chaos, and I think that the two terms are very closely related, along with complexity, we find that as we begin to explore those edges of uncertainty, we bring them into our world of certainty and try and adapt it to them. And sometimes that works, and ultimately we've talked about paradigm shifts and so forth. Everything has to kind of flip over. But then we're in a new level of certainty where we can then begin to look at the edge of uncertainty again. And every time we push that boundary, we learn new things that can then help us restructure our baseline of certainty again. And again, you mentioned that the change is the only constant. And I think that it's that pendulum swinging between what we're certain about and what we're uncertain about that is sort of the rhythm of life. And we are constantly finding ourselves examining uncertainty and trying then to explain it so we can become certain about it. And it's that tension that's always there.
And again, that's the growing place. That's the growing edge. And that's, I think, the best humans can do is live at that place. And Bob, as you talked, I realized it's not about controlling uncertainty, but managing it. And there's a big difference there. As well, the new duality that you brought up to me a year or two ago was between chaos and order. And I think that uncertainty is dealing exactly what you just talked about, that place at the edge where we're always, retreating into our certainty, kind of like this is where our feet stand and we can stand here solid. But as I reach out, there are things that I don't understand, and we are all making order out of chaos, if you will. And I think that uncertainty is that place where it's evident. And that's why I think we need to befriend uncertainty, not to control it, but to dance with it. Maybe not unlike someone with extreme pain who's dancing with their pain. You can never get rid of it, but you can dance with it so that it's kept at arm's length, if you will.
Yeah, well, one example, I think, is living down here in Florida, which is, where the hurricanes tend to congregate. And you never know when that uncertainty of a new storm is going to come or what that path is going to be. But yet, what has happened over the years is that laws have been passed in terms of how you build structures, the way you tie the rafters onto the house so that the hurricane doesn't lift the roof off, and all these different things that we change in the way we live to mitigate the uncertainty that we can't control. And each time we do one of those mitigations, we're learning a little bit more about the world around us and how to be more comfortable in it and more safe within it.
Yeah, as you were talking, I was thinking about Japan and even San Francisco and earthquakes, and how architecture has actually changed in terms of the way it's rooted, and buildings are given flexibility. And this is one of the things I want us to see. Uncertainty, and I use this term often, creates an opening. Empathy creates an opening. Everything we've talked about, just about, hopefully creates an opening for something new to come in. And that's what uncertainty is about. Uncertainty is there at our growing edge. I think of, one of the biggies in the world is Copernicus, moving the center of the universe from the Earth to the sun. And of course, we know that's just a solar system at this point. But the way we've moved that center, if you will, has come from anomalies, things that didn't fit the picture, and they created a place of uncertainty that needed and at least called for exploration. After reading a bit about Da Vinci, it's like some people hear the call of curiosity in a most intimate way. They just want to get there at the edge of what we know and keep reaching. And bless them.
Yeah, exactly. Because most people want to stay in their comfort zone. And it's only when we move out of that comfort zone that we learn new things, that we are able to move the whole world forward, and hopefully a more compassionate and equal type existence. And I don't know. It's again, another tension is the fear of uncertainty and the potential of uncertainty. And if we get caught up in the fear of uncertainty, then we never reach out and find the potential that exists there. So it's one of those universal tensions that we talk about all the time, and we have to realize that we don't have to fear uncertainty. We have to prepare for it as best we can, and then learn from it.
Yeah, and welcome to computer models, especially asymmetrical models that are the ones that are trying to predict hurricanes. And if you look at when hurricane season, why there's all these different lines, it's like those are all the different weather bureaus' predictions based on their computer models, and they're not the same. There's a range of uncertainty, and I think that's part of what we're learning to help us feel more comfortable with it, is that we're learning the tools to explore that edge, and to make order out of chaos, to make reasonable what seems unreasonable. And I think that's part of the journey that not only humankind has, but each of us has.
Yeah, we talked, I don't know if it was last week or a couple of weeks ago, about trying to predict what's going on in the universe. And we bounce around, are we trying to control it, or are we trying to predict it? And I think we ended up on the prediction side. And the way science works, the mathematics behind it, they introduce different variables and determine how much those variables explain the outcomes. But there's always a term, no matter what model you're looking at, there's always a significant term that is called the error term. And And these models try to reduce it, but they can never eliminate it. And that error term is always there. That uncertainty is always there. It's inherent in everything that exists. So, yeah, we keep edging forward and trying to explain more and more, but we can't forget that when we posit one of these explanations, we got to realize that there's always that error term involved in it, and we can always be wrong.
And you were saying that spiritually. I'm thinking the piece that we miss slips in.
Yeah.
It's that error piece is that we know we're missing something. We can't. There's no way we can ever. That's why genuine randomness is impossible. We don't know how to do that. There's even with random computers now we're going. So I think that's to me is helpful that the piece we're missing slips in. That's the uncertainty. That's the opening that allows us to see something new in what we're looking at. And as our telescopes get better, I think it was the Hubble scope or the one after it where they just took a black piece of space and they blew it up, and it turns out there were billions of galaxies, each having billions of stars in that dark space. That we're uncertainty, when we befriend it, we become the Rumpelstiltskins, where we weave dross into gold. We weave uncertainty into knowledge that allows us to take the next step. And our knowledge, Bob, you just said it, even with all our knowledge, we program in a piece for the imperfection of it so that we see that. And I think this says something really good about the human family, I think. I wish Mary Ann was here to respond to that, because she's got a great biological side of it. And, you and I are more on the intellectual side. So that's how that works.
She brings us back down to reality.
Well, the uncertainty in life, how fragile life is, and yet how resilient it is at the same time. Those things have always blown my mind, and how we, how the heart keeps beating for 100 years. Think about that. I mean, come on, man. That's an amazing muscle. That's a muscle, and the uncertainties. When I was reading Da Vinci and I'd see these pictures of the womb that were so weird. Well, it turns out he was not allowed to dissect women. He wasn't allowed to dissect men, but the church let him get away with that. So he was making stuff up. And it's like there was this huge zone of uncertainty that is a delight to kind of entertain, at least.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting how that zone of uncertainty, as we explore, we shrink it and shrink it and shrink it, and then suddenly we reach a new level of understanding where that uncertainty balloons again. We are comfortable in our certainty until we get to the point where there's a big, big uncertainty, and then we start trying to whittle it down again. And I guess, from a spiritual perspective, that there's always going to be that larger, we term it larger questions or larger areas of misunderstanding or non-understanding. And it's always going to be like that because, you just talked about billions of galaxies. Just the thought of what are all those billions of galaxies doing? And we can't even figure out what's going on in our little solar system at this point. And we're learning more about it. But we got a universe out there. And that universe is mostly uncertain from our perspective.
Yeah. Well, and what happens is, and this is the journey right now, every time we face uncertainty and we end up with a whole new view of things because of it, what Bob just talked about is a new order of uncertainty reveals itself. from the Earth-centered to the solar-centered to the galaxy-centered to the where the hell is the universe center, which is everywhere, it turns out. And all of this is not just a journey out there. And this is, Joseph Campbell's last book was The Inner Reaches of Outer Space, which is every time we go out there and we find more out about the universe, we're learning more about us, who we really are. And I think that that's part of this great journey and why I want to befriend and sell to our listeners, if you will, the view that uncertainty is not the boogeyman, but a dance partner. And in that dance, some really good stuff comes out of it if we're able to be honest. And I mean, let's just talk about today and the uncertain times we're living in. After an 80-year stable global rule-centered system, as that begins to fray, as we begin to see new ways of approaching global unification, like the Chinese view. Get a couple verses. There's an economist from a few weeks ago. Wow. I don't know how my wife reads this stuff every week. It takes me like 2 weeks to read one article. And the font's so small. But you see, there's a whole new layer of uncertainty in the world. And it's making a lot of us anxious. And I'm not saying we shouldn't be anxious, but I'm saying that we shouldn't see that uncertainty as a negative, but as an opening for a new evaluation of a new order of understanding. Does that make sense, Bob?
Yeah, it does. And I think that the way to reduce that anxiety, as I was alluding to earlier, is to have a basis from which to approach the uncertainty. The universal signposts that we talk about, the ways we understand the mind works, the ability to see our blind spots, the ability to reflect off of each other and look at new ways of seeing things. Those are all a baseline that we can use as we move toward uncertainty, because we know we're not going to understand all of it, but if we can understand pieces of it and figure out ways to put those puzzle pieces together a little bit, then I think we reduce that anxiety that uncertainty brings.
Yeah. And in everyday life, uncertainty is really an omnidirectional event. It's happening in all directions. In science, what they do is they corral a little piece of uncertainty and explore it. So there's a certain goodness or good feeling that science can handle uncertainty, whereas many of us have not been given the tools to manage it. And again, the word I juxtapose is controlling it. I think we're still in we want to, control uncertainty the way we control our environment. Like there's some thermostat or something that can, filter it or something. When the fact is, uncertainty is unrelenting. And if we are honest, and I think this is people like Buddha and Jesus and Lao Tzu, I think this is where they were. They just, even Islam means to submit. In other words, let go. And I think that's the uncertainty is, going back to the metaphor of surfing on a wave that I think we had last week. It's it's not something that we can put in our pocket and say, I got it under control. It's a wave that's breaking, and we can move with it, or we can move against it, or we can get overwhelmed by it, or we can ignore it.
And the danger is that we build in our little box of certainty, and we fail to leave the door open for uncertainty because of that fear and anxiety. And when we box ourselves into I'll call it false certainty, then we aren't open to those possibilities. And I mean, we see that in politics today. There's a lot of people who are really certain about the way they believe and the way things should be. And when you're outside of their little box, you can see how that certainty is hurting them as well as the rest of us.
Yeah.
And so we always have to remember, I'll go back and say that error term is going to be there. And, we can pile metaphor on metaphor.
Yeah.
But when we have our little bubble of certainty, we got to make sure that we're willing to have that opening to allow uncertainty into our certainty.
And it's like, at what point does one's certainty become dogma? And that's where it closes on itself. It becomes ingrown and no longer has that opening where it is allowed that element of change to come in and help us to evaluate and reorder our lives in a new way. I mean, the world has still not completely reordered the Copernican universe. There's still some flat earthers around. We're always in that process, and there's those who are ahead of the curve and those who are not. But I think it's important the word dogma is the place where certainty closes in on itself, and it's an important one. And Bob, we're coming to the end of our time here. I can't believe it, just the two of us. So final comments on uncertainty?
Well, I think that if we're looking for a baseline, one of the most important things we need to tell ourselves is we could be wrong. And as long as we are willing to admit that we can be wrong, then that opens us up to other viewpoints and to other philosophies and to other explanations. They may not be right, but if we are so certain, if we are so stuck in our certainty, then we never have the opportunity to find something that goes beyond that. And that is the real goal of science, and really the goal of philosophy and the human exploration, the human journey, is to expand, to learn more.
Amen. Growing, learning, loving, and dancing with this point of change. I mean, I think that is the spiritual imperative, along with the global prime directive, which is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So the whole concept of finding ourselves so that we can discern, and I think that's an important word, discern, this place in us where we let uncertainty in. We guard that opening, and yet we make sure that there's a free flow in that place. And when we do, something happens. We begin to see a truth. We begin to see a path. We begin to see the self. And I think this is such an important piece of the deep end, is really getting to know who we are and how we are. The way I talk about it is listening to our Dharma. Dharma is the path of truth that is you. You know, in Christianity we talk about gifts, but it's not about something you have. It's about a path that you're moving through and how that path affects the world and allows you to touch the world and the world to touch you back. And that is your clearest feedback loop when you begin to become authentic, when your own nature has become clear enough that you don't even need to think about it that much. You just need to wake up every day and live it. Listening to your Dharma. It's not as easy as you think, and yet sometimes it doesn't take any thinking at all. This is Red Hawk. I'm here with Bob Hayes and Mary Ann Rudis in absentia, and we wish you the most blessing in this holiday season.